Thank you, everybody. Well, thank you, Maria, for the introduction, and thank you, and I'm very happy to be standing here in front of you. So, Maria and Yannick asked me a few months ago to come and share with you a bit the ecosystem of BC, which is not something that we often receive as a question. But I think it's something which is quite important in today's kind of work that many of you are doing and kind of having impact on the construction culture and architectural culture that we have. And so, as many of you might know, BC stands for Brussels Cooperation. And BC sees itself as a hybrid office. A hybrid office or a hybrid practice because it exists of 3 chapters within BC. There is BC Architects, which is a architectural practice, working, to have impact on the architectural culture and construction culture by designing and building, I would say, examples of bioclimatic architecture, having bioregional approaches, looking into adaptive reuse, and so on and so on. So we have this kind of architectural practice. Next to that, we have BC Studies. BC Studies is a non-profit association which quite focuses on the transfer of knowledge. The knowledge that is created between the 2 other practices, BC Architects and next to it BC Materials, and it kind of transferred this knowledge, shared this knowledge through collaborations with institutions and so forth and so on. And so this is kind of an educational kind of chapter of BC. And next to that, we have BC Materials. BC Materials, which is a cooperative, a workers' cooperative, which researches and develops construction materials from excavated earth of construction sites, something very specific. And so usually my kind of entrance to BC as a hybrid practice stops there. And then I start to talk about some projects, and I start to show things that we've done, and so on and so on. But this time, I will kind of go slightly more in depth in how this ecosystem really presents itself today. This means, and inside our practice, we've asked, okay, try to have and put it in scheme. And so, of course, there's these 3 entities: BC Materials, a cooperative legal structure; BC Architects, which is, it's a company, but is going today through a transformation into also cooperative, in analogy to what BC Materials was and still is to date. BC Studies stays a non-profit. Non-profit because it makes sense within an educational kind of system. It makes sense to have this kind of attitude and approach, and nonprofit has its best kind of, I would say, connection to that. And it also allows us to enter kind of subventions or subsidies, which the other companies wouldn't otherwise. So 3 legal structures, receiving funding from partners, clients, public, private, and there's this amount of people and knowledge that is kind of coming in and being the input and output of these 3 entities. And now when we go into detail in BC Architects, we have a type of projects that we call within the office prototype projects. And I think one you may know, and one is a great example of a prototype project, is the Lot 8 project, because it prototypes, it inspires. We're developing materials from resources that you cannot buy on the market. They're secondary resources from a region and from supply chains that maybe don't exist anymore or yet. So these are projects that inspire. tell a story, test, experiment. A second type of project we have, I would call application projects. Application projects because starting from a prototyping project or a project that invested a kind of time, energy in developing a new material or starting up a new supply chain, we have projects such as Pauli, which today will come back in a few of the presentations, because Pauli, in relation to Lot 8, was a moment in which experiments done here were brought at a different stage, at a different scale, and were rethought to enter a more market-conform situation. And so these are application projects, and they both need each other. Next to that, we have BC Materials. Within BC Materials, we have also different kind of work and work packages, one could say. And one of them is services. When we look at services, there's two types. BC Materials does consulting and development. This means we help other architects, contractors, clients in developing their own experimental or not projects. We're helping them to use biosource, geosource materials. And we do design and prefab. Prefab meaning that we do also within our practice for small scale constructions, the production and the execution ourselves. But this only for smaller scale projects. Hermes is one of them. We have many counters, bar counters all around Belgium that have been developed with rammed earth and so on. So that is something that we are able to do because also there's no need of certain kind of insurances that we're not willing to take on. The research and development, an example of that is the Ghent waste brick, which is a research that we've done for Carmen de Groork and Trans, who are the architects of the new design museum in Ghent. And we've developed a facade block, compressed, reutilizing or using rather the demolished kind of glazing of the city of Ghent and using that crushed to replace the sand particles of the recipe. This allowed us to have a block which is compressed, so unfired, which got and lowered the CO2 kind of emissions by 2/3. Next to that, so research and development, helping to certificate certain new products, experimental products, BC Materials also goes into material production. We're not talking about the bespoke and prefab, which is really executing for bespoke projects. No, we're talking here about production of materials which go on the market. Bespoke, an example of this is actually the continuation of the consultation of this block that we've done for the Design Museum. Actually, BC Materials took on the whole production of all the blocks for this facade as subcontractors of the main contractor of this building. This happened on site. We have mobile machines that went on site in Ghent, and we had a team during 2-3 months on site of 2-3 people, which were producing these blocks, which were then sold to the contractor. This is a kind of bespoke production, but we have also fixed production. Fixed production which translated itself today in a kind of name, a kind of catalog of materials that are possible to make, develop, sell, build with, of the resources of Brussels. A collection of materials that today we call leem. It is a family of products within BC Materials, but has in the near future or in the further future or midterm future, we'll see, the need of actually becoming itself a kind of separate entity, because production of materials does follow different logics that we would like to have in a workers' cooperative. So we feel that there is a kind of friction starting to happen. This production, here to the left, we see our production facilities, happens on our site and in collaboration with also larger industrial partners. So we've seen already like two very distinctive kind of works, but having always the same ambition, really making change within our construction culture. And the last one, which is a very important one if we look on the long term, is the work that BC Studies does. And BC Studies, at one hand, focuses a lot within this idea of education and transfer of knowledge on workshops. There's workshops on offer and on demand. What does that mean? On offer and on demand and on site actually means that BC architects at construction sites tries to open certain moments of the chantier, of the construction site, to allow materials that are being used on the construction site, or maybe certain researches that were done, to transfer them to a set of people, young architects usually, but also trainings for entrepreneurs, to allow them to understand how to maybe use these materials, to how to see how they can involve themselves in these type of constructions in the future, and so on. Because it's important to understand that if we are developing, of course, these materials, we need a force of enterprises, of craftsmen who are able to also apply them. Next to that, these workshops that I just showed happen on construction sites, but having built our own production facility with BC Materials, this allowed us to also start to have a fixed calendar. Throughout the year, we've, in the past years, developed a kind of curriculum, a kind of agenda, in which first Monday of the month is Discovery Day. So that second Thursday of the month is focus on plasters, and so forth and so forth. We have summer schools developing, and so on. And this is something that is so important, and we notice that there's such a request about it because they're always full. It's each time, each week, 10 people coming to our practice, following these courses, which enables them also to use these materials or these kind of approaches in their own work. This is quite clear. The workshops, I think, in the past year, we were approximately 3,200 people that joined our workshops. This is numbers, this is data, which is interesting to understand when you calculate, okay, what has this actually been creating as a kind of effect. Outreach is, I would say, very important, but slightly more difficult to understand what you're reaching here, who the people you're reaching. But it does mean, and that's something very important, to also have a developing of a discourse. What's the kind of theoretical approach around it? What are we talking about? When we look back at the work, what does that mean within our current setting? And this is kind of the outreach that happens, and this goes from the Venice Biennale to academic papers, and it's creating a discourse because we need also this kind of approach. It doesn't need to be only technical, but it's really a kind of link between technical and an academic approach as well. These two worlds need also to have certain moments of combination, of friction, and so on. So this kind of outreach is important. And in the past years, little by little, of course, many people within our practice have been giving courses, have been working with universities and so forth, and we have started to develop a kind of teaching which we like to call experiential learning. This means learning through making, learning through building, and today we have collaborations, long-term and mid-term collaborations with TU Vienne, in Aachen, in Paris, and these mostly work around the idea of design and build construction, in which academic approach, theoretical approach, and real hands-on kind of construction are all kind of combined. And these has been created in a kind of whole world of pavilions all around the world, which goes sometimes to from festivals, but also to kind of parks and so forth. But I think, yeah, when we look back at this kind of ecosystem that is created and that exists today, I think it is one that we felt was important to have if we wanted to really make change, because it meant for us not only working around the architecture, but how the process around it, the resources, the teaching, and this whole puzzle has to be set in order to, little by little, have a kind of integrated approach and a real kind of change in the way that we build. So yeah, that was my 15 minutes of BC ecosystem. Thank you.